So I want to talk about the fourth P of the life design system, which is purpose. The life design methodology is built on a few a priori, which means things that must be true to support the thing. That's built on a few a priori beliefs or assumptions, you might call them. And one of them is that every human being has a unique purpose, a purpose that is as unique as they are, and literally sort of like came into this world with them or with me or with you, right? That we each have a purpose. And there are a lot of indicators that we're truly unique beings. I don't know that they've figured out a biologically necessary reason why we all have different fingerprints. There's a reason why we all have different faces, but they don't know of any reason why we have different fingerprints. Obviously, we're individual at the level of our DNA sequence. We're also individual at the level of our gut biome. Like you could literally, if you think of like a car dipstick, you could take a dipstick and put it down the esophagus of every human and, dip into their gut and pull it out and test it. And for 8 billion people, there are 8 billion different combinations of gut bacteria that are, as unique as our DNA, right? It's like, why are we as humans marked each so uniquely as individuals? That's a big cosmic question, but I believe that part of that, the answer is that we have a unique designed purpose. And this concept is really critical to the concept of life design because it actually is the organizing principle that makes it possible for us to design and actualize a life in which we achieve what the goal of life design is, which is human fulfillment. That we can become completely fulfilled if we can discover our purpose, manifest and live out our purpose, and align all of our being and doing toward our purpose. But the reason that we have to have that is because it's, like I said, it's the organizing principle of how we get ourself out of competition with ourself. So let me explain what I mean there. So there are basically 3 selves, what I call the secure self and the social self and the spiritual self. And I picked S words because they're accurately descriptive and easy to remember, right? Secure, social, spiritual. And so these basically correspond to the needs of a human being, right? And most people are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there's other needs theories, but they all kind of basically say the same thing, right? Which is that as human beings, we have these basic needs. We need what we need to stay alive. We need what we need to stay safe and thus alive. We need what we need to stay accepted by our peers or society or the tribe, and thus, historically to stay alive, because in most of human past, if you were kicked out of the tribe, you died alone, in the savannah or whatever. And then we need what we need to be esteemed and stand out, because there's a reproductive or procreative benefit to being seen as a standout, which allows us to stay alive, eternally through perpetuation of our DNA. And then ultimately there's this, at the top of needs is like we have these, call them spiritual or transcendent or creative or expressive needs to like truly become ourselves in that sense. And actually it's interesting, this is a separate, probably material for a separate video, but if you look anthropologically at the development of humans, we've actually evolved through those stages. So if you go back tens of thousands of years, we were only operating at the lowest level of needs. And then as, there were certain unlocks like agriculture facilitated society, which was like larger than individual tribes. And then there were needs associated with that development. And then ultimately we reached the enlightenment of science and art and, enough economic and technological progress that there was surplus time and surplus energy, and we could start expressing ourselves more abundantly. But even going historically back, people were trying the best way they could with their, cave paintings on rocks or whatever, right? So you've seen throughout human history, people grappling with ways to try to get these needs met. They've always been there, but the anthropological arc of human development has been, you can see that they're sort of moving us up the spectrum of needs, right? Like now we live in a society where people value self-expression, and they recognize that as a valid universal need of humans. Whereas, let's say in the medieval times, 95% of people in the world, it was not even validated that their right to self-expression was even a thing, because they were just a serf in a field and nobody cared what they had to say. They were just supposed to plow the field or whatever, right? So you can see how we're evolving through this hierarchy of needs. And as that happens, psychologically, we're sort of developing these more clear senses of these three selves, right? So the secure self has always been there. That's the self that operates at the level of physical needs and safety needs. And to a certain degree, some of the social needs, right? Because to just be alive and be secure and deal with our safety and our, perpetuation or the provision for our existence and not dying, basically. There's a certain set of neurological functions. We have a certain wiring of chemicals and instincts and impulses in our body and in our minds that drive us toward that need. And there's a certain self that we've developed. This is the self that if we know we have rent due at the end of the month, it will get us out of bed at 5 a.m. to commute to the job that we hate, because we know that if we don't, our secure self will be threatened at the end of the month when we risk losing our place to live, right? So there's drives that are embedded within each of these selves. And then we have the social self, which has its own set of drives, right? And it's about being accepted. Maybe it's about, being the cool kid in high school. Maybe it's about, being a good poker player because we have poker night with our buddies. Maybe it's about, playing flag football on the weekends, or maybe it's about, what beer we're into because our peer group, our beer, what's that word? Beer aficionados. I don't know. Everybody's got their weird stuff that they're idiosyncrasies that get them acceptance within their peer group, and ultimately that help them stand out within their peer group. And yes, that's a set of needs, but there is a certain self, what we might describe as a set of drives and a set of behaviors and a set of affectations and a way that we act out in the world that is, this almost like an identity we've created around meeting that cluster of needs. And so we have an identity we've created around meeting our security needs, an identity we've created around meeting our social needs. And then we have the spiritual self, right? This is the part of us that wants to maybe play an instrument or create music or write poetry or dance, or for some people, it could even be in the gym when they lift heavy and they go internal in their mind, or, we all have these ways, maybe we meditate or pray, or we go to church and worship, and we have these ways that we manifest the spiritual self, and there's a certain identity associated with that. And again, a set of drives and behaviors and affectations. And the challenge we have in life is that those selves compete. They compete for time, they compete for resources, they compete for energy, they compete for attention, they compete for focus, and because they each have needs that to some degree can be mutually exclusive. And so the social self might compete with the secure self and lead us to do something that gets us acceptance within our peer group, but is actually dangerous. Or the secure self might deny the spiritual self and say, I don't care that makes me feel depressed or uncreative or disconnected from my higher power or whatever. I'm going to compromise and I'm going to do it because my secure self is saying that I need the money or I need the food or I need the reward, whatever comes from that, right? And so these selves are in conflict. And this is why we need purpose, because purpose is the organizing principle that we can align our multiple selves toward and try to integrate them and figure out how to meet the needs of all of them while cooperating together instead of competing with each other at the level of the individual or the different selves, right? And so that was a long way of hopefully validating and supporting this again, this a priori, this assumption that of a thing that is true upon which the life design methodology is built, that we have to find our purpose, or else we will constantly live this disintegrated, unconsolidated life where we're kind of in conflict with ourself, right? And by the way, most people are experiencing that most of the time. We call it, the trade-offs of life. We call it compromise. We call it, oh, well, that's just life. You just got to deal with it. You got to roll with the punches. And there's punches from out there. Those will probably never stop. But the hardest punches we throw are the ones in here. We're throwing them at ourselves, right? Because of these selves that are in conflict. And so as we get clear on our purpose, we can start to line them all up. And we can find, this is supported by the Japanese concept of ikigai, right? Which a lot of people are familiar with. This idea that there's a thing that we can do. And ikigai literally means in Japanese, reason for being. The French call it the raison d'etre, right? It's our one thing that we're here to do on this earth. And in Japanese, parlance, they define it as the intersection of four things: a thing I can get paid to do, a thing that I enjoy doing, a thing that I'm good at, and a thing that the world actually needs or benefits from, right? And so, by no means have we invented this idea of purpose here within this life design system. We're just declaring, and by the way, we're not alone in this either. I frankly borrowed this notion from Viktor Frankl's logotherapy methodology. If you don't know Viktor Frankl, go read Man's Search for Meaning. But this idea that our entire life is this quest for meaning to our life. And the reason I've chosen the word purpose rather than meaning is they're kind of two shades of the same color. But I prefer purpose because purpose is more active. And if you look up the actual origin of the word purpose, what it means is actually, it comes from the old French word proposer, of what I propose to. Essentially, my proposal to the world is my purpose. So it's this thing that I propose, that I stand for, that I embody, that I represent, that I am willing to take out into the world and say, see, this is true. And you can know that on the basis of me and how I live and who I am, right? And so purpose is this thing that carries with it deep conviction of not just it's the meaning of me, but it's the guiding principle of me. It's the orienting true north of me, because my life is this proposal or this proposition for the truth of this thing, right? And that's how we enroll our multiple selves into it, as we say, come on guys, huddle up. We've got a purpose now, and we can all work together to get there. In fact, the only way we can get there is if we all work together, which means our social and our secure and our spiritual selves, we have to stop trying to dominate each other and compete with each other, right? Because we're only going to end up unfulfilled unless we align and we move toward this thing called purpose, right? So that is why purpose matters so much. It's actually the only way we can align all of our needs and all of ourselves, all of our identities, all of our masks. And ultimately there's a process for trying to take our masks off and just figure out the one true essence of me that can get all these needs met. And this is the Ikigai principle in moving towards my purpose. So hopefully you're with me on the value of purpose. So the challenge with purpose is that it evolves as we do. And so another quote that I reference often in discussion about purpose is the famous Mark Twain quote, who said that the two most important days in a man's life are the day that he's born and the day that he figures out why. And again, this was from a time when you could use the pronoun man to mean all humans. So I'm not being sexist here. It's the day that one of us is born, and then the second day is when we figure out why we were born. Again, the day we discover our purpose. And so there's two aspects to how we view this question, right? One is, I have a particular purpose that is clear, and I will know it when I find it. And once I find it, I can never unsee it, and I can never unknow it, and the rest of my life will be defined by it. The other is, at any given point, I have some semblance of purpose, and it's coming into clearer and clearer resolution over time, but there's really no point of demarcation where it's suddenly as clear as it's going to get. Because as I move toward purpose, the defining characteristics of a purpose-driven life is that we're constantly growing. But as we're growing, our capacity for purpose is growing. Therefore, our purpose itself will continue growing. Therefore, it should always be expanding and getting more clear over time. And I think that these are both true to a certain degree. So let's take that first angle. All right. The first angle, again, that there's kind of this moment when purpose becomes clear. That's an oversimplified way to say it. But I do think there is an aspect to which, like, our life, we have like a road to Damascus moment where there was, like, before I had a sense of purpose and then something changed and now I do have a sense of purpose. And I do think that happens for us. But I don't think that means that, oh, I'm screwed. I don't know what my purpose is. Therefore, I can't be transformed by my sense of purpose. I actually think that the moment we are transformed by purpose, it's not the moment when it becomes clear, because I also believe that second aspect is true, where it becomes clearer over time as it also expands and evolves over time, as we expand and evolve our capacity over time. But there is a moment when we move from living a life that wasn't guided by purpose to living a life that is guided by purpose, or at least the sense that we have one. And so you could say, in a sense, that if we're not yet clear on what our purpose is, because I do obviously a lot of work on this with people. We talk about this in our events that my wife and I lead, and at Entre across our life design community. We talk to people a lot about purpose, and there's a lot of people say, I don't know my purpose. And I say, okay, but are you with me that you have one? most people are like, yeah. I think there's something intrinsic in us that longs, this is Viktor Frankl's point. We long, the will to meaning, Frankl calls it. We have this willpower, this drive, this will toward making our life mean something. And so if we have that will, it doesn't stand much to reason that we would have it only to discover that it isn't real or it isn't true. There's something like the fact that we have the will to meaning means there likely is meaning to find, or what I'm calling purpose. And so if we have it, it means that we don't even have to know exactly what it is to start living our lives as though it must be true. And as soon as we do that, as soon as we step out of, okay, I'm going to be this unconsolidated, disintegrated bundle of competing selves that each have their own, sort of gratification mechanisms that are, driven by different neurochemicals. There's, dopamine for the secure self, there's oxytocin for the social self, and there's, I don't know, whatever the pineal gland secretes probably for the spiritual self. But instead of allowing myself to just be yanked around by neurotransmitters all the time, I'm going to align toward the idea that I have a purpose. And initially, in not knowing what my purpose is, that's okay, because my purpose right now is to begin the pursuit of my purpose, the quest for purpose, right? And that itself can be a guiding principle. And so at Life Design, that's where we start, is just the belief that we have a purpose. And that from there, we can start to orient our whole life towards pursuing it. And then what you find is that second aspect kicks in, where now that I know I have a purpose, I can immediately start looking back at my life experience and my natural gifts and sort of who I am and what I've been through. There's going to be a thread that's woven through all of it that is suggestive and points me toward whatever my purpose is based on the person that I currently am at whatever stage of the journey I'm in, right? And so, step one is I believe I have a purpose. Step two is I orient my life toward finding it. Step three is I review my life to see what hints are already there. And already I'm starting to emerge with a sense of purpose. Now I have a reason to grow into something, to grow towards something that means something. And so as I begin that process, now I get into this iteration, this like recursive existence where I'm doing things to strive for purpose, and in so doing, I grow a little bit. And every time I do, my capacity for purpose expands and my clarity of purpose enhances, and thus my purpose evolves, and it slowly becomes more and more clear. And this is how my life starts to transform, because I'm telling you, from personal experience, once we're living this way, all this other stuff that used to matter so much, it's not aligned with purpose. It's not even on our radar. And this is the kind of radical transformation that we want. This isn't like the midlife crisis, buy a Harley and have an affair. This is like I'm moving more in the direction with my created nature and ultimate fulfillment and the elimination of the prospect of future regret, right? This is a desirable upheaval in our life. And so then as we're growing in that direction and we start to become more and more what I call purpose aware, there's a kind of a visual that I want to give you that I think helps describe the relationship between us and our purpose from the moment that we choose into living a life as though we have one and seeking it out. And the best sort of analogy I've found for this is something, and I love history and I love like sort of arcane references, so bear with me, but there's something in Greek philosophy called Zeno's paradox. And so Zeno's paradox, there was a Greek philosopher named Zeno who actually posed a mathematical riddle that was unsolvable for thousands of years. It was only in the last couple hundred years that physicists were able to actually solve Zeno's paradox. But Zeno's paradox basically was kind of a thought experiment that described a demigod named Achilles. If you've ever read Homer's Odyssey, you've been exposed to Achilles. He was a Greek warrior that was half man, half god. And he ran very fast. And then there was a tortoise. And so Zeno's paradox said, okay, I want you to imagine that Achilles, like this is Achilles and this is a tortoise, right? And Achilles is chasing the tortoise. And so let's assume Achilles and the tortoise are like 1,000 yards apart. And Achilles goes, I'm going to get that tortoise. And he sprints toward the tortoise. And let's say it takes him, some amount of time, right? 1,000 yards, Achilles is very fast. Let's say it takes him 10 seconds. During those 10 seconds, did he catch the tortoise? Well, no, because the tortoise moved however far a tortoise can move in 10 seconds. And so Achilles goes, man, I just sprinted 1,000 yards. I didn't quite catch the tortoise because it moved a little in those 10 seconds, but I'm pretty close. So I'm just going to close the gap right now, go. And maybe it takes 1 second to catch where the tortoise was. But during that 1 second, the tortoise moved a little bit. Only what a tortoise can move in a second, but it was something, right? So Achilles goes, I'm so close, man. I'm gonna catch that tortoise. But maybe it took a 1/10 of a second. But during that 1/10 of a second, the tortoise moved however far a tortoise can move in a 1/10 of a second. And then Achilles moves again, but the tortoise moves again. And Achilles moves again, and the tortoise moves again. And because the difference between them gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, but it never actually goes to zero, you could make the mathematical argument that Achilles never catches the tortoise. So it is with us and our purpose. We are Achilles in pursuit of our purpose. And however fast we sprint and however hard we push to get to our purpose, by the time we get to where we saw our purpose to be based on who we were at this point, now we're at this point and our purpose has shifted. So we move toward it again, and based on what we can see, based on who we are at this point, and we move toward it. But in that gap, it shifted again. And as close as we feel like we're getting to our purpose, it's always inching further and further out ahead of us. And so that's my explanation of how it is that we see that we have this emerging clarity of purpose based on who we are at the spot that we're in, and that we think we go after it, but by the time we get there, we're in a different place. We've changed, and so our purpose has shifted too. And I use Zeno's paradox as the illustration of that dynamic. But I actually want to add a different nuance to that, which is that rather than going after it in a straight line, I want you to think of it as us filling up a space, right? So imagine that our purpose is like this bubble around us, and that I'm growing to become the person, to fill out the space created by my purpose, because my purpose by definition is always going to be bigger than I am. What kind of life would it be if I had a purpose smaller than who I already am, right? It's going to be bigger than me. And so I'm growing outward, I'm expanding outward to become the person that can fill out my purpose. But by the time I get to the bounds of the bubble has expanded too, right? So then I have to expand a little bit further, and the bubble still has expanded a bit more. And so I will, for the rest of my life, be constantly expanding outward in terms of my capacity and my growth and my knowledge and my discipline and my resources that I draw into my life and my relationships and the things that I learn to do, and all the different parts of life that keep growing with intention in pursuit and in the direction of purpose, but they never quite get there, because as I grow, it grows too, right? So that's the visual that I want to get. And you can start to see with that visual how, man, the more I lean in on this conviction and this clarity of having a purpose, the more my entire life, it doesn't just give me something to do. It doesn't just give me an organizing principle of how to be. It gives me that sense of meaning and purpose that I long for, that ultimately produces the sensation known as fulfillment, which to be filled full, fulfillment, right? To be filled full eventually means to be moving toward a place where I don't even want anything anymore. How relieving would that be? To have our needs so met that we no longer even wanted anything because we were filled full. That is the promise of a purpose-driven life that's moving toward fulfillment. It's also the paradox that we never actually get there, and that we simply get to the end of our days with this life well spent in pursuit of this, to take a term from Simon Sinek, this infinite game that was always bigger than us. But it became the organizing principle and allowed us to orient ourselves, to align ourselves in cooperation rather than competition, and live the best possible life that we possibly could have lived, and get all our other needs met along the way. And so that I wanted to share with you is my perspective on purpose. And I will use that as a basis to do a quick check-in from myself. I'm 45 years old. I first became, I wouldn't say aware, but I first became open to the awareness. I think it was always there. I actually think it's always there for all of us. But I think I really opened myself up to this awareness of this purpose when I was 16. I read a book called The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. And I won't go into that book, but it was a book that has a protagonist who is, it's not described this way, but you can, in the reading of the book, this is a person that is driven in pursuit of a transcendent purpose. And that was the energy. The way that book made me feel is a feeling that I wanted to feel my whole life. And so at 16, I kind of had my eyes open to this purpose idea. And I've obviously done a lot of reading and research and study since, and life experience since then to sort of backfill and validate this idea. But that's when I dropped out of high school, and I struck out toward a different sort of life, a life less ordinary, you might say. And I'm 45 now. So it's 29 years that I have been grinding it out and going through the trials and tribulations of a non-traditional, purpose-oriented life which, by the way, means spending a lot of time frustrated that the purpose itself is not more clear, that I have much stronger sense that it exists than I do clarity as to what it is, right? And that's its own sort of tension that we have to learn to reconcile and coexist with. But it's been 29 years. And I can at least say now in shooting this video that 29 years of struggle, that 29 years of striving has led me to this place where I at least have this life design methodology that I can articulate and that I have fleshed out to a level of robustness where I feel like I can hold it up and say, I have created this on the basis of my purpose. And this thing now embodies my purpose, and my purpose now involves evangelizing and sharing this thing with the world. I was telling someone just today, I feel like a kid. I feel like a kid who gets to play all day, every day, because I have this thing that has been created that never would have existed if I hadn't lived the last 29 years of my life grinding it out from purpose awareness, seeking purpose clarity. And it's been hard. It's so much harder than a normal life because everything worthwhile is, right? You know, I have it tattooed on my arm. Don't wish it was easier, wish you were better. Knowing you have a purpose and that you aren't yet clear on it, and that you, in fact, never will be because you need to grow to reach it. And by the time you do that, it will have grown too. And you'll be in this iterative striving your whole life, is constantly forcing us to get better in whatever way we define in terms of ourself, right? And so I guess this is just me sort of checking in at 29 years into purpose awareness to say, I'm making this video because it's becoming more clear. And part of that clarity is not just to share what it is, but to share the underlying belief that what's true for me is true for you too, that we all have one of these things. My purpose at its present state is this awareness and the developmental state of this concept called life design, and the desire to share it with you. But what I hope for that is that you'll get benefit from life design, but also that it will spark in you, if you're not already there, the same awareness and the same quest, so that someday you can be paying your purpose forward to the next person just as I am to you right now. Thanks for your time.